Today, we're going to dive into a really important topic, the scientifically proven link between what you eat and high uric acid. We're going to break down the top 5 dietary triggers, and this is all based on some solid, evidence-backed research, so let's get right into it. So let me ask you this. Have you ever woken up with just this sudden, excruciating pain in a joint? Maybe it's your big toe, and it seems like it just came out of absolutely nowhere. It's a surprisingly common thing, and it's often the very first sign that something is a little off balance inside your body. And that something often has a medical name, hyperuricemia. It sounds complicated, but it's really just a way of saying there's too much uric acid floating around in your blood. And this right here, this is the direct underlying cause of that painful condition we all know as gout. So, how in the world does the food on your plate connect to this crazy joint pain? Well, this isn't just some old myth your grandma told you. The link is incredibly strong, and it's backed by the best kind of evidence we have. We're talking large-scale studies and meta-analyses. Let's take a look at how this all works. Okay, it all starts with this compound called a purine. Here's an easy way to think about it. Imagine purines are the raw material, and your body is a factory. When you eat foods that are packed with purines, your body's factory gets to work and turns them into its final product, uric acid. Now, a little bit is totally normal, but when you flood the factory with too much raw material, you get a massive overproduction problem. So that brings us to our first 2 triggers, which are, they're closely related, but they have pretty different impacts. We're going to start with trigger number 1, organ meats. These are by far the most concentrated sources of purines you can possibly eat, mainly because they're made of really metabolically active cells.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the difference. On one hand, you've got the absolute purine powerhouses like liver and kidney. That's our first big trigger. And then you have your second trigger, your everyday red meats like beef and lamb. They're still very high in purines for sure, but they're not quite on that same extreme level as organ meats.
And this slide just lays out that difference perfectly. Organ meats, they cause a direct and super rapid spike in uric acid. So for anyone who's at risk, the advice is simple, just avoid them. With red meat, the science points to what's called a dose-response relationship. Basically, the more you eat and the more often you eat it, the higher your risk goes. So the key here is all about limiting your portion size and how frequently you have it. Look, the goal here isn't to get rid of protein altogether. It's about making smarter swaps. So instead of grabbing organ meats or a steak, maybe consider options like tofu, eggs, or some skinless chicken breast. They all give you great protein, but with a much, much lower purine hit. Okay, let's move on to our third trigger, seafood. And this one comes with a little bit of a catch. The risk isn't the same across the board. It really depends on what kind of seafood you're actually putting on your plate. The highest risk stuff, that includes those small, oily fish that we often eat whole, organs and everything. We're talking about things like sardines, anchovies, and herring. And shellfish like mussels and shrimp, yeah, they're also way up there on the purine scale. But here's where it gets nuanced. A lot of these same fish are fantastic sources of those heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. So if you don't already have issues with gout, a balanced approach is really what you're looking for. It's more about moderation, not necessarily cutting them out completely. All right, let's talk about our 4th trigger. And this one is kind of sneaky. It's fructose. See, unlike meat or seafood, fructose doesn't bring a bunch of purines into your body from the outside. No, instead it fires up your body's own internal uric acid factory. It's an inside job. This is how it works, and it's pretty wild. First, when fructose gets to your liver, it just burns through the cell's energy, which is called ATP. This process creates a byproduct called AMP. Then that AMP gets converted directly into uric acid, which boosts your internal production. And to make things even worse, it's a double whammy. Fructose also makes it harder for your kidneys to get that excess uric acid out of your system. So where is all this hidden fructose coming from? Well, it's overwhelmingly in sugar-sweetened drinks. We're talking sodas, packaged juices, energy drinks. They are the biggest culprits by far. These drinks don't just spike your uric acid. They also load you up with empty calories that have really damaging metabolic effects. All right, on to our 5th and final major trigger, alcohol. And this isn't just one problem. Alcohol actually attacks your body's uric acid balance in 3 separate ways. It is a true triple threat. Just remember that number, 3.
3 separate mechanisms all firing at the same time to jack up your uric acid levels every single time you have a drink.
So what are they? Okay, first, it increases production by speeding up how fast purines break down in your liver. Second, it decreases excretion. The byproduct of alcohol, lactic acid, basically cuts in line at the kidneys, which blocks uric acid from being removed. And third, with beer specifically, you're just getting a direct dose of purines from the brewer's yeast.
And you can see it plain as day on this chart. There's a clear hierarchy of risk. Study after study finds that beer poses the highest risk, and by a pretty big margin. Spirits like whiskey and vodka are next, and they also carry a high risk. Wine, on the other hand, especially in moderation, seems to be the least problematic of the three.
So after going through all these things to avoid, let's kind of flip the script. Let's shift our focus from a big list of don'ts to a smart, empowering plan for how you can actually take control of your health.
And I just want to really hammer this point home. The link between these foods and uric acid isn't a fad. It's not some new theory. It's backed by the highest standards of scientific evidence. The connection is real, and it is absolutely measurable.
So, what's the big takeaway here? For most people, the goal is informed management, not making yourself miserable with total prohibition. It's about understanding the biggest triggers, like those organ meats, beer, and sugary drinks, and then making conscious, strategic choices to limit them.
And that really brings us to the end. The power is in your hands, and it all starts with small, smart decisions. So after everything we've covered, what's one simple, smart step you can start with today? Thanks so much for tuning in.